Hey everyone, it's Dre, and I'm back again with my Druid Warrior Sword. In the last video, I ended with having finished up doing the actual modeling after the video, of course. I finished extruding all of these little, I guess, branches, appendages, wood extrusions, whatever you would like to call them. And I had also applied some materials to the handle section as well as the blade. Um, Now this video is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be a time lapse. The footage that I recorded for the time lapse, I didn't really like the way it turned out. So I figured I'll just go through and talk about the things that I've done to get it to the final point where it has I've applied texturing to it. I've also applied bump map to it to give it more detail and talk about how I went about setting up the render and just all these different things. So how long this video is going to be, I'm not sure. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. So um, each of these separate objects, the handle and the blade, they have their own material. Over here for the blade, you can see the little blade material. Look at that. Ignore ignore this right here, the greenish type stuff. Normally, when it's just the material, it would be this color. The whole ball would be that color with specularity, which would be the highlight um, being this color. But because I have a texture applied to it, you're actually seeing the texture right now. It gives you a preview of the texture. Um, and so both the blade and the handle have that. See, here's a little texture preview for the handle. And you'll get to see that in a little bit. Um, and so I went through, I applied the materials. I fiddled around a lot with all of this just because I'm new to Blender and it's fun actually to just fiddle around, change some settings, render it out, see the difference. Um, but you know that's there's so much to go into with all of this. Just know that there's the material that you have to apply first to the object. And then once you have that applied, um, well, before I actually show you the texture, once you have the material applied, you pretty much have to make the UV map. And to make the UV map, you have to create these seams, these red lines that you're seeing. And over here on the left, UV mapping, mark seam, unwrap. The way that you do it, you pretty much end up selecting the edges between different vertices, and you have to select the ones that you want. This is how it's going to break up the polygons into separate sections for your flat texture. So I created all of these seams, and of course I kept it symmetrical on both sides. That way I could lay them on top of each other, making it much easier than having to try and create the textures for this side and then match it up to this side and all of that type of stuff. So once I created that seam, I unwrapped it. Now let me show you what that ends up creating. And just to show you, when you unwrap the UV, here are all the corresponding UV points. They all correspond to the vertices locations. So say if I select that one, notice I have that particular face selected. It shows it right here. Just like that one. So on and so forth. That's how it works out. You make this flat image. And once you have this flat image, you actually end up exporting it. Same with the blade also. Notice how the blade's laid out. Very flat, very easy to work with in an image editor. So let me show you in Photoshop. When you save out the UV map from Blender, this is how it comes out. it is a PNG that has transparency to it, which makes it really easy to work with. Um, Pretty much what I end up doing is creating another layer under it, and I will start to paint with it on that layer that's underneath it. As you can see, I used various brushes to get the underlying design for the blade. Let me turn off the mesh. So here, this is supposed to be like a leaf type design to it. And so I have the lighter section. I have the fibrous look to it in order to convey leaf type material. Um, and of course, having the mesh on top, I'm able to turn down the opacity on it, and that allows me to see where I have things lining up, and it makes it really easy to make a good texture for an object in Blender. And of course, once I get the UV map ready, I save it out as its own file, as its own PNG file, and this is the image that gets used for Blender. And then I also go back and create a bump map rather than a normal map. A normal map, it's better to create that using a high definition model rather than trying to base it off of a flat texture. You can do that using a Photoshop plugin, but when I tried it, I didn't feel like the results were all that great. So I used the older style bump map, which is just a grayscale image. Darker areas are lower, lighter areas are higher. So the vein section that you see here is going to be bumped up out of the actual leaf part. And then of course I did the same thing for the handle. So this is the layout of the handle, and I made sure once I created the UV map, I had to make a lot of adjustments. I had to move I had to move all these sections, the similar sections on top of each other, or the same sections on top of each other, the mirrored sections, I guess I should say. And then once I had them on top of each other, I had to do a ton of modifications to try and make sure that I don't have any of these faces being too terribly stretched, which in this area where I have the extrusions, I really could not get it too well. If you can see, these small faces are actually the ends of those extrusions, and that section I'm probably least proud of just because it didn't turn out as good as the rest of the blade, but I'm kind of at a point where I think I've taken it as far as I really want to go with this. And so here it is. This is the PSD file, and I work with layers. I work with a lot of layers. I have the base color, and I make sure it's something very different that I'm not going to be able to misconstrue it with what I'm working with. And then the base, well, I have the background color, and then the base color, which is just the flat brown color for the wood. Let me go ahead and turn all of this stuff off. That way you can actually see what I'm doing and sort of how I worked with it. So yeah, I have the background color. I did the base. I did some work using this layer here. I don't believe I actually ended up using this layer. Here with dark bark and light bark, I was pretty much just adding randomness to it. I used a very grungy type brush that just scattered, the coloring all over the place. I used different types of lighting for it. Soft light for this one, exclusion for this one. Here we have the highlights. So the bark gets lighter in these areas. Then the detail. This is where a lot of, this is the detail right here. The dark areas, I made sure to, here's the palette. These are the colors that I used. Let's get a little bit closer so you can see. So yeah, this is the type of detail that I went into with the wood. Very random. It's growing. I wanted it to have like this growing look to it. This nice the growth, I should say. That's exactly what um, I wanted, because pretty much this object causes the wood to kind of grow out and take the form um, of the handle area. This isn't supposed to be carved this way. It's supposed to actually just happen, because that's how this magical little thing works right here. Anyways, so yeah, just wanted you guys to get a good idea of the type of detail that was put into the painting aspect of it. And of course I used a variety of brushes, um, and this is just stuff that you have to experiment with, really. At one time I was going to do something with like green glowing, but um, I didn't really pan out. I didn't feel like I needed it. Oops. So let's zoom back out. So then of course this becomes the base texture, the PNG file. And then afterwards I go through and I create the bump map, which pretty much this is just flattening the layers into another image, and then pretty much getting rid of all the color. And it ends up working very well, just based upon the way that I went about adding the color to it, because you see the highlights here adds, you know, these areas are going to be pushed out with the bump map, and then the darker areas. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of tweaking after the fact with this. And then like I said, I tried to do the normal map, but I didn't care for how it turned out. Once again, this is the sort of thing, normal map, that it's better to use a high definition model to create the normal map, which in Blender currently I don't know how to do, but I will be learning, and then I'll probably make another video about doing that. And so I save that out also, and there you go. So in the materials section, pretty much for each object you have to add your materials to it. And the way that it works is the first material in the list is the first one that's applied to the mesh, to the UV, I guess you should say. That's why you want your color texture to be the last one added, because that's going to be what's on top of everything else. And so same thing for the handle. You have your bump map, you have your color texture, and so as you can see in here for image, this is where you go in and you actually select what images you want to use for them. Okay, and when you add a texture, normally it has something like it'll be like marble that automatically gets added to it, and so you'll have to go in and specify that you want it to be an image or a movie. See, like right here when I hit new, it automatically adds it as clouds, and then you have to go in, select image or movie, and then you can go in and you can add the image that you want to it. Let me go ahead and delete that. Alright, so now that I went over that, let me go ahead and close this. Boom. And then I can show you in the viewfinder. This is what it looks like in the viewfinder with the textures added to it. Get it a little bit closer so you can see. Now, of course, in the viewfinder, you can't see the normal or the bump mapping going on. So you're just seeing the texturing. And like I said, down here, it's a little bit rough because there's a lot of stretching of the texture compared to, say, up here, which is very nice, really good layout of the texturing. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the way that this turned out. I think I really like how I went about creating it. So once you have all that in place, as you can see over here on the scene hierarchy, I have multiple lights. Let me make those visible. So just so you can see, I have various lights all around the place. This is a sun, so it's an overall light source that casts in the entire scene, and then the rest are point lights that they have a limited amount of illumination, so they only light up so far, and that's just to add some diversity to the way the shadows work on the blade once you render it out. And then of course I have my main camera, which this is the one here. Let me go ahead and move that a little bit. There we go. Alright. Okay. So I have that main camera, and then I also have another camera that I was using to get a different perspective. I wanted to get an up-close shot just to analyze the way that it would render out. And you can switch between those. So now I have all that in place, as well as the background. I have this large plane here to give a background. That way, as light is hitting the blade, it causes there to be a shadow behind it. And so let me go ahead and render it out, and you guys can see how it looks finally. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave this rendering process in the video. That way everybody can see how it goes about doing this render. And so it's pretty much just doing section by section, doing the calculations, the illuminations and everything. And I've actually exported this and imported it into Torque just to see how it looked. And it didn't seem like the bump mapping was working in Torque, but hey, I don't think I'm going to end up using Torque anyways. So here we have the final render. And as you can see, with it being a bump map, you can see it has really nice detail to it. I think I did an alright job right here, especially right here, and then for giving it a wood look, especially like this right here. This looks really rough, and I like that. I think it looks really cool. This could probably use more work, but whatever. But yeah, this is the final render. I really like the way that Blender works. Using that, I mean, the way that I'm doing all of this, I'm using Blender, I'm using Sculptress, and I'm using Photoshop. And I mean, anyone can really do it. You just have to work and practice and create. And the more you do it, the better you're gonna get. So I really hope you guys liked seeing how I went about doing this. I hope you enjoyed the final product. I hope you think this looks cool. I know I do. So anyways, until next time, later.